The Elsa shirt is back. It's appropriate considering the person that I'm talking about today has ice powers. Um, so this is the fourth video in my Wizard Kings series that I am doing for the Black Clover series. Since we know about 6 of the Wizard Kings, this is number 4. I've already done Lumiere and Princia and Jester, and then now I'm going to do Edward, and then the next time around for this will be Conrad, followed by Julius. Julius might get a little bit of a wait because I might wait and see how things kind of end with Black Clover, see where that is at that point in time when I record that video, so we'll see what's going on with that. If we finally get a resolution to Julius. So we'll see what happens there. But Edward. So Edward Avalaché is the 20th Wizard King. So we're slowly getting closer to like the time frame that we're currently in the story. 20th Wizard King of the Clover Kingdom's Magic Knights. At his time of death, he was 66 years old. And kind of what happened was, instead of starting out as a Magic Knight, like most of the other, like all the other Wizard Kings were, minus, Lumiere, he was actually a priest within the church that's within the Clover Kingdom, and probably is within a bunch of the other kingdoms as well. That was a church that was within the church that's within the Clover Kingdom. So probably the same church that, the father who is the priest at the church in Hodge, at the orphanage there where Austin, grew up, and, that Sister Lily is part of that same church. And so he started off as a priest, and then he became a Magic Knight, and then became the Wizard King. So that's what a big chunk of the story is going to be about. In regards to his personality, mostly of what we get to see in the movie, but some stuff that we learn about a little bit later. As I've stated before, a lot of the information in this is coming from A, the Sword of the Wizard King movie, and B, from the additional volume that came out that was like the 23.5 volume or something like that, that was released with a lot of sketch art and information about the various Wizard Kings that were part of the movie. That were the ones that were resurrected by Conrad, and about Conrad himself. Although we learn a fair amount about Conrad during the movie itself. So more about the other 3. So while Edward seems very standoffish and such, he is still a fair fighter. He does give, later on at the end of the movie when he's fighting, or the climax of the movie when he's fighting against Noelle and the Black Bulls, he does give them a chance to run away, to live on and everything, instead of just destroying them and everything. Because he really only wants to get rid of the, get rid of the nobles and the criminals, just because of what you'll find out about in his past when I get to that. As has happened with the other Wizard Kings, as what happened with Princia and with Jester, where, they become the Wizard King, and then they try to use their power to try to make the, the land better, make the Clover Kingdom better, and the royals and nobles are like, oh, no, that's not happening. No. We like our power where it is. So I'm going to get to talk about that, and of course kind of about like the little bit more of the relationship that kind of gets built up during the battle of Noelle and between Noelle and Edward. So into Edward's backstory. So Edward was born with a promising future as a Magic Knight, but he had no interest in becoming one. So either he was born into at least a decently ranking noble family, possibly a royal family, probably not since it doesn't specify, but he was, had a promised future where he probably would have done very well within the Magic Knights, and the fact that he becomes the Wizard King kind of, implies that. But he didn't really have much of an interest in that. He didn't want to become a Magic Knight. Instead, he spent lots of the time within the churches, listening to the priests in the Common Realm and the Forsaken Realm. So because of Austin, and Hodge and such, we're very familiar with the Forsaken Realm of just like it's just there. The nobles and the royals really don't care about it. Because what happens in those places doesn't really affect them. And, Edward actually would go and listen to priests talk about it and everything, kind of like how nowadays there's, pastors and priests and bishops and the Pope and other religious leaders around the world that, talk about like the places where there's famine and starvation and drought and all this other stuff and massive poverty all around the world, in our world. And, priests would be doing the same thing there. Some of them because they genuinely wanted to try to make things better, which is what's hinted out with the pastor, the priest that is at the church where Austin and Udo grew up, the one that raised them, and is, for all intents and purposes, their father. He's, for all intents and purposes, their father. And so, we kind of get to see that there are, the good priests and stuff like that. And we've seen other pretty decent religious figures within Black Clover. Not too many, but those ones specifically, along with the matron that is at the orphanage where Marie is, that we've dealt with her several times. But what happens is Edward ends up deciding that he learns about what the harsh conditions are like in the Common and the Forsaken Realm, and I think he ends up actually going there and probably seeing it for himself. And he finds that, because of the harsh conditions that they face, because they have little or no magic power, probably more on the little side of that. And so he decides to actually become a priest himself. He enters the church, goes through all of the training and everything like that, whatever schooling and stuff like that would be involved in becoming a priest, and that's what he becomes. And he ends up setting up an orphanage and taking in orphan children and then helping them change. He tries to help change the lives of the weak and feeble, because he's, it is kind of the whole thing of just like, I have the ability to help these people. If I can become a priest and I can go and help set up these areas, set up orphanages, and I can take care of these children that have no one, I can try to give them a better future than just living on the streets and dying or whatever else may befall them. And that's what he does. Lots of priests and saints and, sisters and everything like that. Look at Mother Teresa, look at so many others. And not just from Christian, but lots of other mythologies, lots of other religions as well, have done the same thing, where it's like, I have the power to try to make things better here, so I'm going to go and try to do that. And that's what Edward did. And for a while, he was able to do that and try to make things better for about 10 years. About 10 years later, there is another war that happens between the Clover and the Diamond Kingdom. The Clover and the Diamond Kingdom just have way too many wars. Another war happens there, and unfortunately, because, as is, quite obvious a lot of the time, within, very widespread countries, where like the villages and cities that are on the edge of those countries are generally the ones that tend to end up getting the most damage, befall the most damage during wars and invasions and stuff like that, because they're like the front lines. So what ends up happening is the Diamond Kingdom attacks. They end up raiding the village where the orphanage is, and all of the children are killed. And Edward, for the first time in his life, is actually just enraged so much that he actually uses his ice magic. And I mean, we've seen examples of what he can do in the movie. And this is him probably for the first time outright actually using his magic in a defensive capability. He may have used it in other varying capabilities ever since, even before and since he got his grimoire. But this is the first time where he's actually using it at like full capacity at that time. And he ends up, defeating the enemy at that point in time. After that, and witnessing his own powerlessness at the time, and the loss of the children, he is determined and, steadfast and determined to become stronger. So he does finally join the Magic Knights. So, you get your grimoire when you're about 16, and after that, you have the chance to go and become a Magic Knight. And, you have the whole, audition ceremony. It's what it is. It's an audition ceremony. It would be entirely more entertaining if they haven't done like the voice setup for the voice setup on, what is it, on Fox or whatever, where like the Magic Knight captains aren't actually watching like the person that's like showing off their power until like afterwards, and then they like, oh, I want you. There's that type of a thing. That would be entertaining. That would be very entertaining to watch. But see Yami and Nozel and Fergolion like fight over someone because of their power. That would be entertaining. But what ends up happening is, he goes through all of that. He becomes a Magic Knight, so he's probably in his late 20s, possibly early 30s at this point in time. Because by the time, you go through, you become a priest, he sets up the orphanage, and then 10 years later is when when the Diamond Kingdom's attacked. So he's probably late 20s to early 30s at this point in time. And he becomes a Magic Knight. And because his intention is to try to prevent this type of tragedy from happening again, which we've seen similar things happen when it comes to Princia and to Jester in the past, where they tried to do this because they became a Magic Knight, or became the captain, or became the Wizard King, because they wanted to try to prevent these atrocities from happening again. Didn't work in any of the other cases. A spoiler alert, it doesn't work here. And he becomes a Magic Knight, and he eventually, because of his generosity and love for the weak, it earned him the respect from many, probably many within the Magic Knights. And eventually, they rallied behind him enough, that made him very, very well loved and liked and very popular and everything. And because of his sense of justice and strength, it allowed him to climb the ranks and then eventually be crowned the 20th Wizard King. So again, probably something that, very similar to what happens with the other Magic Knight, with the other Wizard Kings that we are aware of. That, they work their way through the Magic Knights. They, gain a, following of people that very much approve of how they're running things, that very much want to try, what they've shown that they are capable of and everything. We've seen something very similar with Asta and and everything, with them being able to not only rally their squads behind them, but also have the other squads, the other Magic Knight units, and even, additional things, additional groups kind of rally behind them. So, we're all aware that by the end of the story, it's either going to be Asta or, most likely Asta, that will be the Wizard King. So it's a very similar thing to what's that happened in that regard. And, but despite the people, all of the common folk and the ones from the Forsaken Realm and everything, and even a good chunk of the Magic Knights probably, loving Edward and adoring him for what he'd been doing, the nobles are very much opposed to his aim to eliminate the boundaries between royal and common and Forsaken, between all the different realms. And again, just like with the other Wizard Kings that were, banished for being traitors, it's the royals and the nobles. Probably not every single royal and every single noble, but probably the ones that hold the most power and the most sway. So very much possibly ancestors of Noel and Fergolion and, a bunch of the other, nobles and royals and stuff like that, families that we're aware of now, back then, may not have been quite as forgiving or quite as open-minded as the ones that we've seen now that are currently in the story. Because we've even seen, like, when it comes to Fergolion and his siblings never really seem to look down on any of the other, like Asta. um Leopold just straight up like started challenging him for, to be a rival and everything, but like Fogolion and Marileona never really like looked down on Asta or any of the other ones that were from the Common or the Forsaken realms. But we've seen with many of the other Magic Knights how they treated, Asta and and the others who were not from, who were from the Forsaken and the Common realms. Edward wanted to try to get rid of those boundaries, and not just within the Magic Knights, but within the kingdom as a whole. And again, bear in mind, there is also, while he may be the Wizard King and he may have control over the Magic Knights for the most part, there is also the actual Clover King, who is, the ancestor of the current king. As stupid as the current king is, previous, his ancestors hopefully at least had some, a bit more power to show for themselves than just what he can do with summoning a giant light version of himself that really does nothing. The royals and the nobles probably convinced the king, if the king or queen at the time, wasn't already on their side, that, Edward needed to be taken care of. The royals and the nobles saw, his goal as very outrageous, and they began scheming, and eventually they ended up, having his title as the Wizard King revoked. Which, now, I would assume throughout history there's probably been Wizard Kings that were able to suck up to the royals and the nobles and keep them happy, and, were smart enough not to, try to topple the ruling class or whatever. And they probably were able to hold on to their power a lot longer. But, that's not always the case, and we've seen several examples where the Wizard King, tries to make things better for the realm as a whole and gets revoked or arrested or deposed, or however you want to put it, and ends up in, some horrible situation where they end up dying. Same can be said for Edward. What basically ends up happening is, they strip him of the title of Wizard King and he loses everything. And he just, including his faith in, the church and everything that he'd been following, ever since he was a kid, and that he'd become a priest for, that he'd been trying to make things better for and everything. Edward then ends up deciding to seek vengeance, which is a natural occurrence that tends to happen in anime and in real life. Oh, you took everything from me. Okay, time for vengeance. And he ends up forming this resistance to put an end to to the royals and the nobles alike, and seeing them now as an obstacle to changing the kingdom for the better. This is not a new concept at all in anime, let alone in world history. Very similar to what happened with the French Revolution and other revolutions around the world, for varying degrees. And what ends up happening is he continues to eliminate those in power. However, he believes it is the only way to make things better. However, the resistance is eventually stopped, and eventually Edward was captured and later executed. As I said, he's 66 years old by the time he dies. So out of the other previous Wizard Kings that I've discussed, he's the one that actually was the oldest. Since we don't have the exact amount of dates as to like how long Princia and Jester and Conrad necessarily were the Wizard Kings. Conrad's we can kind of figure out a little bit, but I'll do that in the next one. But Princia and Jester, we don't know exactly how old they were when they became Wizard Kings, but they were both quite young in comparison to Edward. So Edward dies. He's executed by the kingdom he had sworn to try to protect. Again, not the first time in history that's happened. Not the first time in anime that's happened. Not the first time in Black Clover where that has happened. And, centuries later, Conrad Leto ends up, this is where we enter the terrain of the movie. Conrad Leto is able to use all of his powers that he has from all of his different key magic, along with the Imperial Wizard King's sword, to resurrect Princia, Jester, and Edward. He resurrects them, and because they all share a similar goal of trying to topple the royals and the nobles within the Clover Kingdom, just because they all have grudges against them. Very valid grudges, in all honesty. Very, very valid grudges, given what we've learned. But their intention is to, use the Wizard King's sword in order to, rip out the Clover Kingdom from its roots, basically, and destroy it all, and then, raise it back again better. Again, decent plan, not the best execution. And they end up, of course, having to fight against, Asta and the rest of the Black Bulls and the rest of the different, Magic Knights and everything. We see a lot of that. Lots of that happening there. Edward and Princia and Jester, of course, they're being powered by the sword just the same way Conrad is. And, they're using their power to trap and subjugate the common folk and the royals and everything like that are not already captured by, that weren't able to escape with the Magic Knights and everything, and draining power from them. And basically we end up getting the height of the battle, or the height of the movie, the climax of the movie, where, as I said, each of the previous Wizard Kings end up having to fight against different characters. Princia, of course, as I mentioned, fights against Marileona. Jester ends up fighting against Yuno mostly, but has Yami and Frogolion and Nozel there as like backup and assistance to help him, since they're kind of on the weaker side, since they've been drained of their power quite a bit more. Asta ends up fighting Leto, and then we have, Edward ends up fighting against Noelle and the rest of the Black Bulls. So we have, this great moment where they're all, all the rest of the Black Bulls are all ready to fight and everything, and they're all ready to use all their different combo attacks as much as they have. Bear in mind, at the beginning of the fight, Noelle does not have full access to her grimoire anymore, to her power at this point in time, because Conrad has locked it away and copied it for himself. So she does not have full access to that. Partway through the battle is when Asta is able to actually hit the Wizard King's sword in his battle with Conrad and knock the power away from him, so that way that is what releases Noelle's power, and then she's able to have her full power back and able to do her Valkyrie dress form and fight that way. So that's what we have there. That's what happens in how that happens. But Conrad, or Edward, ends up looking over all the Black Bulls, and as I said, he gives them a chance to run. I think they exchange some blows, and he's like, I'm going to give you a chance to run because you've proven yourselves that you are, willing to fight for what you believe in, so I'll give you a chance to escape. They don't, because they're the Black Bulls and they don't run. And they're all just, working together and using all the different combo attacks that they have and everything like that. And, Noelle keeps, they kind of keep, Edward, because his monozone, which he activates at one point in time, kind of A, activates this giant freaking church thing that pops up behind him. B, freezes the entire area. So we keep getting these moments where the ice gets melted by magma with his firepower and some other variations of, combining powers. It gets melted, and then, Noelle tries to manipulate the water as best she can, because she can still do that. She can still do basic water manipulation and stuff, and then tries to use that against Edward, and then he just freezes it again. And so there's different things that keep happening there and everything with, the two groups, the Black Bulls exchanging blows with Edward. And eventually what ends up happening is, I know there's also this one moment where the entire battlefield for Edward is covered in magma, and I don't remember if that's because they start fighting on top of a volcano or whatever, or if it's just because of other combined attacks from the Black Bulls that have resulted in this giant magma pit type thing, and everything is, it's magma, and then Edward just freezes the entire thing, which I'm like, okay, that is impressive. I will agree with that. That is impressive. I don't remember which one of those is the exact case, but one of the two is correct. Or it's some variation of that. So there's that power going back and forth. And eventually, as I said, Noelle gets her power restored and she's able to go into her Valkyrie dress form. And then between that power, along with Gauche makes mirror clones of her, so that way there's like a bunch of different Noelles that are all in her Valkyrie dress form, which I did not catch the first time I watched the movie. I rewatched the movie before I did the review to familiarize myself with it again. I'm like, oh, he multiplied her. That makes sense. And so she's, using her power, to attack Edward at this point in time. And he's like, summoned up other giant, ice monster things, ice creation things that he's able to make. And she's, attacking them and destroying them and just causing more damage and everything like that to him. And what ends up happening is, I think he ends up taunting her about the fact that she's a noble, or the fact that she's a royal, or he's like something about that throws him off, because I don't know how much knowledge they would have about the Black Bulls. I don't know if they did any research on them, or how much information Conrad would have been able to share with them based on other information he gathered. I don't know. But what ended up happening is, Edward is very impressed by what they are able to do. And one of the things is, of course, as we know as an audience, the Black Bulls is made up of misfits. Noelle is royal, yes, and some of the other ones have, noble blood in them, but some of them are deposed nobles in regards to Gauche and different things like that. And then there's the other ones that came from the common and the Forsaken realm in regards to, Magna and, of course, Asta and such. So they are this combination of different things. And a lot of them the Black Bulls are this very good allegory for the fact that, anyone has the capability of becoming a magic knight. And Edward is standing there, doing this whole battle, and, Noelle is doing huge amounts of damage to him. And of course, again, during the battle is when the sword gets affected again, and Edward ends up actually starting to lose power. And, by that point in time, Noelle has actually managed to kind of get him knocked down. He's taken a lot of damage, and I think his mana zone is faltering at that point in time. And he ends up asking her name. And she goes, "I am Noelle Silva." And of course, Silva, being one of the royal families, is probably one that he's familiar with. Probably one of the ones in the past that may have actually been up against him and opposed him when he was Wizard King or during his revolution. And he says, "You're a good girl, Noelle." And that's right before he fades away. As, just like Princia and Jester did, where they fade away because, the power of the sword, and Conrad is no longer there to sustain them. And then, of course, they end up, their little constellation silhouette things appear one last time to Conrad before he fully just, dies. And, is gone into the ether. And just like the rest of the Wizard Kings, all, pieces of them are still within the sword, as I've stated. It's very similar to a multi-personality Horcrux. But I think what they are implying with the fact that, Edward is looking at Noelle and seeing that she is this representation of a royal who was to a degree ostracized by their own family, although he doesn't know that. But he doesn't know the full backstory with that part, but he knows that she's a royal, given her last name, and he also sees that she's with this group of magic knights that are very much commoners and from the Forsaken realm, and, outcasts and stuff like that, and how she is willing to stand up and stand beside her friends and her comrades as far as she is able to go, and as far as her magic will let her. And I think for him, just to a degree, what Conrad ends up seeing by the end of it is that progress has been made in the Clover Kingdom, and a lot of progress has been made a lot more recently and everything with so many of the royal families in regards to the Vermilion and the Silva families and such, seeing and having their eyes open to what other people from the Forsaken and the Common Realms are capable of, and the fact that you shouldn't just disregard them because of where they are from or because of their status, and that does not also mean that also does not mean that nobles and royals should instantly be given their status within the Magic Knights just because of what their birthright is. And I think that's supposed to be like Edward can see that things have started to change. They're not perfect, but they're starting to change. That there is like that seedling of that little sapling development there. Part of that is because of Noelle and because of her brother and, several other, royal and noble families that have, interacted so much with the Black Bulls and, and other, members of the Magic Knights that are from, the lower ranked families and stuff. Lower ranked or common or Forsaken families and realms and such. So we kind of get that. That's, for all intents and purposes, where Edward ends, although I have seen artwork that someone has done that is like, oh, what if the different Wizard Kings got to stay? And it's like, clearly, like, Princia and Marileona would end up being, like, best friends and, like, just have fights all over the place. And it'd be like, just go fight somewhere else where no one lives. It's fine. Go have your fun. And, like, Jester would probably just bug the heck out of Yudo. And that Edward would end up, like, joining the Black Bulls and being, like, their grandpa of the Black Bulls and, like, that type of thing, which would honestly be hilarious and probably true. And so I know someone did, like, a little what if scenario with that. So then we have Edward's powers. So Edward's magic is called Ice Wedge magic, which, as we see throughout the course of the movie, is kind of like an ice version of, very similar to what Jester can do, because Jester creates barriers, Edward creates ice, and he forms it into these different wedges and everything, so he's able to generate and manipulate them into very smooth or very jagged and very robust and complicated or very simple variations of ice. Hence Elsa. He just has like this shield that he makes. He has a World End Church, which is, I think, of part of what happens with his mana zone, is an additional thing that happens with his mana zone. And then he has World End Martyr, which is this giant ice-like creature thing that has a halo and has wings. And that's what Noelle ends up destroying that one when she's fighting him. Obviously, he has immense magical power, and of course he has a mana zone that is very much dedicated to ice and freezing things and everything. And of course his grimoire is pretty good. It's still just a 3-leaf clover. Unless I forgot that there was one with Conrad where Conrad had a 4-leaf clover, which I don't think so. I think the only Wizard King that we are aware of that actually had a 4-leaf clover one was Lumiere, because I don't think that Julius has a 4-leaf clover one, because he actually doesn't have a grimoire cover. He just has like the single page that ends up turning into like a multitude of pages for his time magic. So, again, I really like Princia and I really like Edward, and then once I learned more about Jester's backstory, I really like Jester quite a bit more. And of course, the backstories really are not gone into in the movie. It's, again, you have to kind of look it up to find out more about their backstories. You get hints of it here and there, but not enough to verify it all. And you can kind of deduce that, like, oh, if one of them was deposed or banished because of the fact that they tried to make things better in the Clover Kingdom, but that was against the wishes of the royals and the nobles, then it stands to reason that the other ones were the same way. And we're going to see something very similar happen with Conrad when I get to him. And then, of course, when I get to Julius, we're going to see additional things that happen there. in regards to other ways that Julius has tried to change things, and in the ways that, even Conrad probably tried to change things to begin with. So that's what we have there for Edward. I thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.